So my name is Johan Falk. I am the co-founder and the CEO of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. A warm welcome to our event, together with the 1.5 supply chain leaders, Women Business and BSR, and it's hosted by Business Sweden. And today we are extra happy to launch the first version of the Supplier Engagement Guide today here at COP26. Some of you are listening in on the link. If you have particular questions, please go into menti.com and enter this code. So, the science is clear. We need to halve emissions every decade. And it's particularly important to halve emissions by 2030. The 1.5 supply chain leaders was founded last year by the Exponential Roadmap Initiative together with Ericsson, IKEA, Telia, BT Group and Unilever. And it now also includes Microsoft, Nestle, Tech Mahindra, Ragn-Sells, Scan Global Logistics, Telefonica and MasterCard. All these are absolute leaders in sharp climate action. And it's also supported by the Women Business Coalition and UN Race to Zero. So the purpose of the 1.5 supply chain leaders, well, that is to work together to cut emissions across the value chain through concrete action and collaboration. And based on the understanding that we need to work with and support our suppliers to be able to halve emissions by 2030. And our goal is also to scale this narrative to other initiatives and other companies exponentially. So today we'll talk about the purpose of the guide and make a walkthrough of it. We'll continue with a panel with Unilever, BT and Ericsson, three of the supply chain leaders, before wrapping up. So I would first like to welcome Mats Pellbeck-Sharp, Head of Sustainability at Ericsson, one of the founding supply chain leaders. Welcome, Mats.
Thank you, Johan. Great to be here.
Great to have you here. So, Mats, Ericsson is one of the initiators of the 1.5 supply chain leaders. Please tell why this initiative is important and the basic foundation behind it.
Yeah, I think it was already back in 2018 at the Climate Summit when we launched the first Exponential Roadmap report that we realized that in these meetings we always were the same companies and organizations. So we realized that the 10% that are here is like preaching to the choir. So we need to have the other 90% join as well. And then we realized that we can sort of inspire and work with our customers, as you can see on the membership that we have done, but also that in fact you can require your suppliers to work with you. So customers can be inspired by while suppliers can be required. And I think that is one of the key things. I mean, it's impossible to push a chain, but you can pull your supply chain with you in a way. So I think that is really why we started this. And we also recognize that if we put these requirements on our suppliers, we also really need to help them to meet those requirements. And that's why we created all of these tools and worked with SME Climate Hub and so on. So I think that all of this together is a toolkit on how to work. And I think I'm so happy that we have been joined by so many leading companies in this initiative, and I mean not only from the tech sector but also from food sector and furniture and others. So I think it's really a momentum on forward-leaning companies, really leading companies taking the advantage of helping their supply chains to meet the targets.
So that's great to hear, Mats. And can you tell us why are we developing this supply engagement guide that we're launching today? Sort of what is the purpose of it as far as you see it?
Well, we don't have time to wait. We have to start bending the curve now. And then we need a much more massive engagement. So I think halving emission by 2030, otherwise we are too late. So a lot of focus has been in the past on and is still, I think, from political side at least, on the hard to abate sector. That is right, because we need them to change, but at the same time we need to start to change now, and then to start small with everybody doing their own thing, but on a wide scale, I think is what this initiative is all about.
Thank you, Mats. That's a great summary. So now we like to take the next step and go a little bit into the Supply Engagement Guide. So I would like to welcome Emily Olander from Ericsson, who is Climate Action Program Manager, and Julio Beruti, who is Director at BSR. So welcome both, and great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Johan.
Yes, and the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. We're really happy to be here today launching the guide. So I will just take you back to the history behind this. As Johan said, we need to halve emission by 2030, really putting engagement throughout a whole value chain. That goes into your downstream value chain, working with your customers. We will hear a few of Ericsson customers coming later. But the supply chain is a really hard way of working with. You usually have a lot of suppliers. We have around 20,000 in Ericsson supply chain. So creating the impact is really important. So we wanted to create something that we can be using throughout our supply chain, but also create the engagement we want. So we already in 2019 started the Ericsson Supplier Engagement Program, where we actually, instead of focusing on the 20,000 suppliers we started to focus on the 350 suppliers that had the biggest and most strategic impact for Ericsson. And we didn't start with, setting their own or implying emission reductions for X amount of tons of reductions, but we said that they need to put their own 1.5 degree targets. And I think that's quite evolving. So we go out to them, 350, before 2025, and say that they need to halve emissions by 2030. So they're helping Ericsson supply chain and ultimately our customer supply chain to reduce emissions. So when we started to engage with the 1.5 degree supply chain leaders with this, we saw that we actually had so much in common with other companies that you've seen here today and we'll hear from. So we started to go through and create this supplier engagement guide. So I think Julio will take over and talk about that.
Sure. Happy to, and thanks Emily for the intro, and thanks to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Julio Beruti, I'm a director with BSR. For those of you not familiar with BSR, just very quickly, we are a global non-profit organization that works with a network of 300 companies across the world on sustainable business strategies and help companies collaborate. We are a member of the Women Business Coalition, and that's why we thought we're very pleased to join forces with Exponential Roadmap and with the 1.5 supply chain leaders this year to work on developing the 1.5 Supplier Engagement Guide. So as Johan and Emily alluded to, the guide is a free, open framework that is available for any companies to use so that they can go and work with their suppliers to set and implement a 1.5 aligned target and move to action with clear steps and openly shared approaches that companies, among others, definitely the 1.5 supply chain leaders, are using themselves. So it's building on the experience of the companies that are working with this and providing it openly to everybody. In a moment, I'll dive into the structure of the guide itself, but before I do that, I want to stress 3 key points. One is that we were very clear in developing this, that the 1.5 Supplier Engagement Guide specifically addresses one component or decarbonizing supply chains, and that is engaging suppliers to take climate action. There is one important recognition, which is the companies, when decarbonizing their supply chains, need to think of collaboration across the value chain with different members of, with different partners, really, and innovation alongside the engagement to achieve the 1.5 ambition that we want to achieve. The second one is that the guide is openly available for everybody to use. So companies that are advanced and companies that are not advanced, that are starting on the Supplier Engagement Guide, can benefit from the framework, which is thought to be like a framework without a clear entry point, but the companies can adapt to their own company. And the third issue I want to bring up before diving in is that by no means in creating this guide together with the 1.5 supply chain leader, we believe that we have the solution to working with suppliers. It is really our contribution. It is important to be humble, share approaches and collaborate with each other because it's a shared learning journey that we're all on. So with that, I will speak briefly about the guide, and Emily, feel free to jump in at any point. But the framework of the Supplier Engagement Guide is structured in 4 blocks, each of them with 3 recommendations and a transaction feed block. So as you can see on the slide there is foundation, procurement, supplier engagement, reporting, and a 5th one, which is collaboration and innovation. We decided to structure this so that companies can begin with whichever blocks and recommendation they find to be the most feasible for them to start with, and then engage their supplier upon. Each block has 3 recommendations that you see on this slide here with, for example, management commitment, 1.5 suppliers target, and supply chain GHG mapping for the first one. And each of these recommendations has a why, what, and how. So that is why it is important to implement, for example, a thorough management commitment. What, which explains in a bit more, with a bit more clarity what this is about, and how builds on the recommendation from one supply chain leaders on how companies can approach this. But importantly, at the same time, there's examples of actions on the right. And those are taken from the 1.5 supply chain leaders and other companies that work with suppliers on implementing this recommendation and provide inspirations, text, and resources that companies can take and copy-paste and apply to their companies and in how they approach this with suppliers. Very quickly, I would like to explain what these 5 blocks are about. Foundation, as you can see here, you can think of it as getting your house in order before engaging with suppliers. So the 3 recommendations are to have a clear commitment from the top management to work with suppliers, to set a goal which is public and aligned with 1.5 degrees, and communicate this with your suppliers, and to map the greenhouse gas hotspots within your supply chain to prioritize this. Procurement will be about the internal processes. So it is about, for example, the text that you can apply in your code of conduct, in the contracts for new suppliers, in the supplier scorecards that you apply. And importantly, it is also about embarking the procurement team in this journey with you, with trainings and the right KPIs to achieve this. The supplier engagement part is about how to embed climate into the buyer-supplier dialogue that your procurement teams as buying companies have. And how do we support and recognize the performance of suppliers to make sure that they are supported along the way. Collaboration, innovation, we talked about it before. It's really this underlying assumption that we need to collaborate and innovate the way we do things if we are to achieve the 1.5 ambition. And so it expands and provides ideas about this. Anything you would like to add, Emily?
No, I think you said it really well. I think one is really important thing to mention is that, as you said, it's not, one rule fits them all. It's a process as well, and it's been the same for Ericsson and also Telia, who's been a really huge contributor in developing this guide together with you, Julio. We start, but we also need to continue. So, evolving your climate target is really important going forward as well. And that's why you maybe need to start to pick a few things from the guide and then continuing but you have to start with yourself and set it up the strategic direction, so you get the whole management with you. And I think that's was really well said. And when we saw we got that from Ericsson, we actually managed to do a lot. And our responsible sourcing team have really been evolving in how they talk to suppliers, and there's also learn throughout the way, but non-supplier is the same as the other one. So talking to someone from Southeast Asia is different than from Europe, because you have different regulation but also different requirements. And I think coming together from 1.5 degree supply chain leaders and putting the same requirements for suppliers within different value chains, I think that's really important. So we have not really one common standard, but we hope to have a common standard of how we set targets and work with this.
And I think, great presentation. I think what is so important, if we should be able to share things, is that we have some kind of framework to be able to share best practice, because it's very difficult otherwise to do that between companies. So the idea is really to put together this framework and have contributions. It's completely open. Do you like to comment on that? Well, actually, I got a good question here, so I will state that to you. It's from Oliver Hurry, which is one of our good friends driving a fantastic initiative with the Scope. With the Scope 3 peer group, which is bringing together, actually sharing best practice. And he says it's focused on urgency collaboration, which is key. How can we scale the membership and access to the guide more rapidly and with more sectors? Anyone would like to pick up that? We can come back to it later.
Yeah, I can comment on that. I think this is a very important point, Oliver, and thanks for the question. One of the ways in which companies can appropriate the guide and contribute to it is really through the resources, I think, because the resources are meant to be a living part of the guide. So the idea is that by no means we have all of the best examples in there. As companies develop their approaches, please feel free to reach out to us and put your examples forward on how companies are approaching this, because only by doing this and providing new resources, companies can jump on board and we can accelerate action.
And we will have an interface, so there is an opportunity to provide your examples and contributions. Of course, they would be sort of assessed, so they are aligned with the 1.5 ambition. So we can't promise to integrate everything, but that is the purpose, of course, that it's an open shared platform where companies can contribute. I had one more question, but I think I saved that to later on, actually, because it will fit with the panel. So thank you very much. It's a great presentation and great overview. I think it's very, very exciting. So now it will be exciting as well, because we will shift to the panel discussion. And I'd like to invite Gabrielle Guinier, who is Head of Environmental Sustainability at BT. Welcome, Gabrielle. I would like to invite Mark Engel, who is Chief Supply Chain Officer of Unilever. And I would like to invite Mats back on the stage again. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your company's net zero and halving by 2030 targets, and what is your progress sort of up to date? I'll start with you, Gabrielle.
Yeah, so BT has actually been on a climate action journey for almost 30 years. We set our first carbon reduction target already in 1992. And we set our first science-based target in 2008. And that was really, of course, before people had started to think about linking science and carbon reduction. That target was to reduce our carbon emissions intensity by 80% by 2020. We met that target 4 years ahead of schedule. So we decided to be even more ambitious. And in September 2017, we announced our 1.5 degree science-based target, and BT was the third company in the world to do that. And we're now looking to be net zero for operations by 2030, and by 2040 for our supply chain and customer emissions. And we're doing really well. We're well on our way. Since 2016-17, we have reduced our operational emissions by 57% already, so we've already halved. And we have reduced our supply chain emissions by 19%.
Okay, that's impressive, I would say. And over to you, Mark. The same question to you.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Look, we have a net zero target by 2039. I should take my mask off, by the way, because I think we can. So we have a net zero target by 2039. We also, on top of that, have two science-based targets. One is to halve the carbon footprint of the end-to-end product life cycle by 2030, and to have zero carbon emissions in our own operations by 2030. It is very important because our consumers in the end are asking for this, particularly the younger generation is voting with their wallet and are not going to buy you if you are not, on top of providing benefit to the consumer, also providing benefits to the planet and society. So there is not just a moral case, there is an economic case to it, and I always keep saying that. We have very clearly seen that the engagement in suppliers is very important in this journey. That's also why we're excited to be here, because this is all about engaging your suppliers. And one of the things is we've been very successful over the past 12 years to cut the emissions in our own operations, which we cut by 74%. But we also realize that that's only 3% of our total carbon footprint. So you need to basically look at your scope 3. The nice thing is that your scope 3 is usually someone else's scope 1 and 2. And so we think we have a good plug and play model, because we've been working for 12 years to cut our own carbon footprint. But that is what we're doing, basically.
Thanks. And Mats, any reflections from your side?
Well, on the notion of being, I think we are all companies that are sort of aiming for own activities or for their own operations as a net zero by 2030, and then aiming to work in our value chain. And I think we share the value chain. So, I'm a supplier to BT, so I'm your supplier. So when you're pushing or pulling, I'm on the other end of that chain. So for us, it's very important to support our industry in a way on the net zero journey. And I'm super proud of the mobile industry being sort of 40% net zero committed, and I think that's a unique approach that our industry association and our industry has been successful in driving. So leading the race to zero is the mobile industry from that. So we are really working hard with a lot of our customers, so we get a lot of work.
That's great. So the next sort of question is, of course, why are you part of the supply chain leaders? But I actually like to add there, if you see an opportunity, if we can get more complete value chains, we basically could have leaders from the supply upstream, which provides that opportunity, as you talked about, Mark, where we can actually work together to ensure that we cut emissions. I think that's an opportunity for the supply chain leaders to actually onboard some of your other fellows in the value chain, so we can work together to really move even faster. What do you think about that, Julio?
Sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah.
What, me? No, definitely. I think one of BT's key suppliers, Tech Mahindra, is already part of 1.5 supply chain leaders. I think, as Mark said, if we look at our company's end-to-end carbon impact, so for BT, 5% is our own operations and the rest is scope 3, which is why it's so important to work with the whole supply chain. And I think we joined supply chain leaders because we wanted to learn from others, we wanted to share best practice, and as you say, this is how we spread the word. We have much bigger impact than when more and more of us come together. So, I'm definitely for looking at, how do we expand? We hope that, as a result of what we're doing here today, for example, and, the guide that has just been published, more companies will come and join us.
Yeah, from our side, we work with about 56,000 suppliers. And so we've launched a kind of climate promise, which is asking these suppliers to promise the same. It's very similar to what you were saying about your supply base in terms of making the commitments, making a science-based target, and then commit to be transparent about what your emissions are to Unilever. This COP is all about action. Making commitments is actually the easy bit, but doing it is the hard bit. Yeah. And the thing I really like about the 1.5 degree supply chain leaders, but also things like the SME Climate Hub, is that it gives concrete solutions for action. And that's what we need right now. We need action. We need to halve the carbon footprint in this decade. And so I absolutely agree with you. We need to bring more people on board. It's a big opportunity, but it makes a lot of sense to do it. So I don't think you're pushing against a closed door here.
Okay.
And this is so nice to hear. I think this is fantastic because that's exactly the idea. I think all of us are sort of in a pledge fatigue. We are signing pledges after pledges after pledges. Nobody have ever come back and asked us if we've met them or not. So the idea was that this is a non-pledge. This is about setting your target, be public, and then reduce. I mean, take the action and do something about it. And that was the whole idea of the supply chain leaders, the business playbook, and SME Climate Hub. So I think that is the uniqueness about it, that providing the tools and driving things through action and not through pledges in a way, I think is really why we started this. And so happy to hear that we agree on that is the way to go.
So maybe we can take a common action to recruit some more, what I call it, keystone actors in the value chain, which you think are incredibly important, so we can cover the complete chain and really show that this is achievable, because that is what other companies need to understand. We will go fast, and then it's about competitive advantage, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So can you provide some concrete examples how you are engaging with suppliers? We talked, about this framework, but just give me one or two which you think are very efficient ways to do this. Gabrielle?
Yeah, and I think that there are lots of different ways. One is through the requirement, as Mats has talked about. So, for example, with some of our key suppliers, we now have a climate contract clause. So basically, when you sign a contract with BT, we ask that we require that you reduce your carbon footprint over the term of the contract with BT. We've spent a number of years asking suppliers to report to CDP. I think just by disclosing again and reporting on what you're doing, that encourages people to take action. We have an example. We have our Chief Procurement Officer write out to our suppliers, I think similar to what you guys are doing, around, have you set a science-based net zero target? Are you buying 100% renewables? Are you engaging with your suppliers? And for the people who said no on the net zero target and on the renewables, we actually had a survey, so we followed up, and I spoke to some of them and said, we don't understand. What are the barriers? How can we help? And I think the encouraging thing was that between when we sent the email and when we followed up and spoke to the suppliers, a number of them had actually already changed. I mean, we're really changing, I think, now on net zero targets.
Yeah, very, very similar to Gabriella. I just said to you about the 56,000 suppliers and the climate promise, but we also we found out that 300 of our suppliers is actually 85% of our footprint. So with that specific subset, we have another program called the Unilever Climate Program, in which because we will not achieve our 2030 target if our suppliers, these 300, will not deliver. So if you call the other 56,000 a nice to have, the 300 are an absolute must. And so, providing the toolkits and providing the plug and play sets in order how to decarbonize. And I have to say, the 300 are usually the larger suppliers and they have their own programs already. But it's very important that you work together on that, because you want to drive the systems change and nobody can do that alone. and we all work for the same consumer. So it's not a difficult thing. As I said, I think there is a lot of willingness right now to basically commit, but I think particularly the smaller companies need sometimes some help to get started, and I think that's where we can really help them to help us.
Yes, that's great. Mats?
No, it's just so interesting that we also have 300 that's responsible for 85% of our emissions. So it's while we have 24,000 totally. So it's very similar situation. And of course we work very hard with them and sort of having them to set target, and many are already well on the way. But also we have more difficult ones that we need to work with closer and to support. So I think it is really good. And also I think having the same statements from different industries also testify to the fact that we have the same problems. We can do it together also across different sectors and industries, and I think that is probably also very true with this initiative.
So I think all of you have like critical suppliers that you work directly with, a couple of hundreds or something like that, but then you also have a very long tail. And from our perspective of SMEs, small and medium-sized companies, and these are also incredibly important. We need to support them to, cut emissions and ensure that they are competitive over time. And that was the sort of reason why we created the SME Climate Hub together with Women Business, ICC, and UN Race to Zero as a common resource. And also the supply chain leaders have sort of committed, of course, to support that initiative because it's an opportunity basically to nudge your smaller suppliers, to ask them or require that they join the SME Climate Hub, and they can get one requirement and one place where they actually can get support. So that's a basic idea. And do you like to elaborate a little bit on that as well? The opportunity with the SME Climate Hub and the sort of the sort of opportunity from a large supplier's perspective, Gabrielle.
Yeah, no, I think the SME Climate Hub has been, an absolutely fantastic resource to have for us to point smaller businesses to, and the fact that it is targeted to smaller businesses, it is giving the guidance that they are looking for. So actually here yesterday we had an award ceremony with the UK government called Heroes for Net Zero, and that is small businesses who have signed up through the SME Climate Hub and that have shown the most innovative climate action. So, doing lots of things just to celebrate and to show other people how it can be done. And so these smaller businesses can lead by example and therefore inspire other small businesses to act as well.
Mark?
Yeah, I mean I think the two paradigm shifts that we need. First one is that sustainability costs money, or net zero costs money, and I think there are a lot of use cases now where you can show the opposite, and benefit comes in many different ways. So a paradigm shift is required there. And then the second thing is, where do you start? Once you're over that hurdle, where do you start? And I really like the SME Hub. If I can give one constructive criticism of it,
yes,
I think it's very good at the second part, providing the toolbox. I think it could do better getting people over the psychological hurdle, particularly in SMEs, that sustainability is costing me money, my business will be less profitable if I do it. And I think that this is because if you don't get over the first psychological hurdle, you'll never get to the second part. And I think that's an opportunity for the SME Hub to do even more, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's great input. We have a fantastic team, and Pamela is here, by the way, who's the director of the SME Climate Hub, so great for joining us. Okay, and there is, as far as I see, a very, very strong roadmap. The idea is to continuously invest and actually take the input from the small companies. It is a starting point, but it came to 3,000 in 1 year, which is a good start, but the goal is 1 million and 10 million. And I think with the great people working on that is achievable. So that was my input on that. But please provide all the feedback to the organization so it can be improved. Mats, any comment?
Yeah, and this is probably my sort of pet thing, and I was on an earlier panel with CDP, and I think it's about the simplification of reporting for small and medium-sized companies. We really need an easy way to collect the data, and because then we can also demonstrate the progress that are driven here, and I think that is very, very important. So CDP currently is too complicated. We need a much simpler tool for small and medium-sized companies. I mean, we are asking about boards and so on. I mean, my company that I have and your company, Johan, there is sort of, I'm the board, and my wife is sort of the second in that board. And I mean, having a committee for climate is not a relevant question for small and medium-sized companies. I mean, up to 30, 50, 100. We really need, what is your direct emissions? What electricity do you buy? Period, and sort of report that and collect that data, because then we will start to sort of get that as well. So I think that is sort of my sort of key input to this, and you know that, Johan, because we have talked about it a lot. So
Yes.
we will get there.
I think we all agree with you about we're working very hard, and we're all trying to create something about minimal reporting
And
for
to
small
respond to
business.
that, the minimal reporting is a sort of holy grail. It sounds very simple, but it's much more difficult. And we have, I can say we have been working the SME Climate Hub together with the CDP to put like a framework together, which is actually being finalized. But that's on a high level. So we actually will implement, the SME Climate Hub will implement a concrete tool, which is based on simplicity and shouldn't be that far away as far as I see it. That's the first step to start to pilot that.
That's great.
Yes, that's great.
Looking forward to that.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so what do you see? Yeah, we talked a lot about the opportunities, but I think it's also important to share what are the barriers and what you feel is really difficult. What do you see as the sort of hard things we need to crack? Because I think we need to discuss that between us, so we can actually collaborate to try to break some of these really difficult boundaries. So what do you say, Gabrielle?
I think, still, and we've heard this from other panelists, we're here, we're in our little bubble, we're in our club, we all talk about net zero, but there are thousands and millions of companies out there that have no idea what we're talking about. And, for us this feels normal, but actually it's not. And so how do we bring that, awareness out to so many more companies? How do we build that scale? I mean, this is really what we need to start doing now. We need to build scale on climate action. And, hopefully through these tools and through what we're doing and, various things. For example, at BT, we have a BT Tower in London. We have put banners on the tower about the SME Climate Hub and about engagement. And, just so people on the street can see something and go, oh, what's that all about? So how do we get messages out there to more people, I think is key.
I don't have much to add to that. I mean, it's like you're reading my notes here, because I think that is precisely it, so let me not repeat that.
Okay, Mats.
Yeah. It's all about scaling. I think one of the things is that when we present this, a lot of companies say, is it really that easy? I mean, don't I need to pay? It is. So if we can share the simplicity of the SME Climate Hub and the work that we are doing to get started, and I agree with you, how can we sort of make it either sustainability or business, but rather a sustainable business for our suppliers? I think that message really needs to be in a way enhanced, and then I think we can really count in the million companies that you are hoping for, Johan.
Yes. So I invented one more question. Maybe I go off the script a bit. Is that fine? But when do you think? How could we achieve this goal that it will become the new normal? That you basically have to be part of Race to Zero, which means basically, setting a target aligned with halving by 2030. But not only that, taking action. So let's think about it. Just like you provide your annual report, you can't sort of miss that as a company, even if you have a small company. That will be very expensive. We know that. So can we reach that point so it becomes a new normal? Because that will make life easier for you, because you have your scope 3, then you will have all suppliers lined up with the same targets. How can we achieve that and when? Gabriel?
So I think two ways probably. One is actually through government regulation. So that governments start requiring companies to have net zero target, but as we talked about, to publish annual updates. How are you getting on? What progress are you making? What's your action plan? How are you going to get there? And I think we need to, and you know, as Unilever and you know, Ericsson are doing, you know, we need to start saying to our suppliers, well, if you don't have a net zero target, if you don't have a climate action plan, actually, we're not going to do business with you anymore. You know, this is now the new normal. That's what we are expecting.
Yeah.
I think you're going to get a lot of natural pull, because wherever there's a customer in the chain making the demands, the chain will follow. I think the role of the regulator is important, because if you have good regulations, which means punishing polluting activities and facilitating green activities in taxation policy or rules or whatever, you do two things. You create a level playing field for business, and you create innovation. And I think a lot has to come from innovation. I think the current business models need to be reinvented, need to be disrupted. And I think the regulators can play a bigger role than they think. And then last but not least, the party who's even more, let's say, influential and powerful than the customer is the finance, the people who finance these businesses. And so this is Finance Day today in COP. And I think there is a lot of finance. If the financier says, if you don't have a net zero target, I'm not going to finance you, this is very powerful. But I also think that a lot of finance needs to flow to SMEs in order to do the right things. And I think there is still a big gap for smaller companies, and particularly in the agricultural space or the startup space, to get this access to finance. So I think regulation, finance, and customer pressure, I think, were the three things that are going to drive the change.
I think I don't remember if it was Gabriel or Mark that said that my scope 3 is somebody else's scope 1 and 2. And from that perspective, in the name of simplicity, to start with scope 1 and 2 for everybody, and not necessarily have them do life cycle assessment and understanding their whole value chain, especially for smaller companies, will simplify a lot. So, and as long as we sort of have the requirement on them, putting the same requirement on their supplier, that's enough, because if we sort of get all the way in the supply chain, everybody will have one scope 1 and 2 requirements, and that's so much easier to understand what yourself are doing. So for me, the simplicity of just pushing the scope 1 and 2 requirements on reporting would really help a lot, instead of having everybody trying to find out what sort of, I mean, your suppliers need to understand your sort of emissions, and then how is that used in. So to understand the full value chain is much more difficult than to understand your scope 1 and 2. So for me, in the name of simplicity, focus on scope 1 and 2 first at least. So get that going. That is, I think, is that a way to accelerate implementation.
And Mark, I had a question I will give to you here. It's from Perth, Western Australia, who says that the Exponential Roadmap tools are invaluable. Thanks for that. Can you give an example of supplier engagement success from global food chains, from soft commodity crops?
Yeah. Well, you know, in soft commodity crops, we work a lot with smallholder farmers. You know, we engage with about 1 million of them, and you know, there are very basic needs around, you know, regenerative agriculture and forest protection, etc., etc. It's a very specific element. But if we don't build that in, and that's another request on the SME hub, is what do we call an SME and what's the scope of the SME? Yeah. Because in commodity or let's say food companies with long supply chains, you know, Unilever has a 4 million hectare agricultural footprint. So we work with a lot of agricultural companies, and specifically on that, I think it's challenging because we're at the end of the chain and they're at the beginning of the chain. So I think digital unlocking on programs, because usually there are 3 tiers of suppliers in between. And second of all, what are the what are the skills that people need around regenerative agriculture, nature protection, in terms of, because that is also, let's say, a carbon reduction mechanism, particularly in the agriculture and forest commodity industry.
Great. I have another question here. Why is this more an action initiative than a pledge? Mats?
Yeah, well, already from the start we said we don't want another pledge. We don't want people to sign up to something that we don't follow up. So the difference is really that we don't require them to do a lot of pledges. We require them to be public about their targets and then deliver on reporting their progress towards those targets. And those targets, they have requirements that we say that, I mean, science-based they should be. They should be on a 1.5 degree pathway, otherwise it's not good enough. So it's more about a quality requirement and setting the targets and delivering action. So that's why we think it's driving action. When I talk about pledges, we have signed numerous letters to politicians, and often they are good, and we are also committed to doing different things, but I have never seen them being followed up. And here, difference is that we really would like to track that, and that's why also I think the reporting is so important, because then if we get that going, we would also have an easy way to tracking and can demonstrate how much we really impact. So I think that that's why I think this is more action than pledge.
I would agree with Mats. I think the fact that companies are setting public targets.
Is it okay? Yeah. Now.
Sorry. And I agree with Mats. I think that companies setting public target that actually galvanizes their employees, so they know that this is now serious, this is real, this is something we need to work towards. And it changes markets, right? It galvanizes markets. So when companies, small or big, say we want to buy renewable energy, well then people will start supplying it. We want to buy electric vehicles, and that's why we need to get together and get more and more people to be public about the challenges, the actions, what progress they're making, and what help they need to get to net zero.
Yes. So I had one more question. What I'm trying to understand as a company are the main reasons for joining the supply chain leaders and your plan onwards, but what would be the argumentation as far as you see it? I mean, if you're a leading large company with a huge supply chain, why should you reach out to join the supply chain leaders in that case?
Well, in my view, because many of the problems that you encounter have already been solved somewhere else, and it is a great knowledge network, and at the end of the day, I always say you have the farmers and the poets, and at the end of the day, making pledges is about poetry, but then the farmers need to make it happen and do the job, and most of us in supply chains are left with the task to then implement what we have pledged, and so having a knowledge network that, as Gabriella says, you share stuff, you share the issues. We're all undoubtedly going to be in need of hydrogen, but there is no green hydrogen in the world today. So how do we fix that? If I go alone, then it is far less attractive than if we pool in a network saying we all have factories around the world, they need green hydrogen, how do we make that happen? As an example, or green logistics, everybody's struggling with green trucking, and how do we do that? And so I think if we pool the resources together in an initiative like this, I think it's super valuable.
And I can comment a little bit on the plans. Our idea is to identify, game-changing projects that like this one, the Supplier Engagement Guide, which is not duplicating what other organizations are doing, and that is very important. And we're looking into particularly acceleration of renewable energy in collaboration of the existing initiatives, and we're looking at a number of other areas where we think with this group we can contribute to the breakthrough, and working together with existing initiatives like RE100 and so on. So I think that is also important. Our intention is not to duplicate, but to help accelerate exponentially. And we need to be selective on the projects, but that is what we are thinking about moving forward. So, going a little bit back to the guide, how does this supplier engagement guide fit into your larger program of activities, and how could you sort of use it, and how can you help scale it? Just if you have any ideas on that. We just launched it together. Gabrielle?
Yeah, I think again, people come to us looking for examples of how to do things, where to start, and I think that's how we want to use it, communicating with our suppliers, and saying if this is a great place to start your journey. But I actually have an ask for everybody who is here or listening in. We need your help to do the same, right? Spread the word. Is an excellent guide that we have launched today, and especially thank you to Ericsson and Telia, who's not here with us today. I've worked extremely hard on this, and spread the word. Help us, get others to join in.
Mark?
Yeah, look, I know we live in a digital age, but I would say send me 56,000 copies and I'll make sure that they land in the right place, and I will tell all my friends.
Mats?
Yeah, I mean, it is free, it is helpful, so I don't understand why you shouldn't join, really. It's more about getting people to understand how easy it is. I think that is the real nut to crack, because then I think we will sort of open the floodgates.
Okay, thanks. So, to Gabrielle and Mark, do you think there, and Mats as well, do we have a particular action we like to take on based on this discussion, just on the top of your head? What we need to do to move forward, in particularly?
I think just to give an example of something that I think has worked well for us in the UK is, having worked also with the UK government on this and having their support has been really helpful. So, I do encourage others to look at your local, your home market, and how to get others involved in kind of a national maybe network as well.
Yeah, look, I am super excited to meet this lady later on, because I think the SME hub is really what is going to unlock a lot of things, and I'm keen. Unilever has a big scope in the emerging markets, where SMEs are sometimes more informal and work differently, and so I'm interested to take it outside of let me call it the European view or Eurocentric view of an SME. I want to talk about agriculture, but I really want to, build on how we can make this better, because at the end of the day, and bigger, because I do see that as one of the key breakthroughs in terms of getting this journey started and scaled up.
Yeah, I think we should continue to work on the tools, simplification and the toolbox, because I think that's so attractive. So if we share our tools and our knowledge, I think that will sort of help a lot. And I'm also super excited to provide you some digital solutions for your supply chain.
Thank you.
And sorry for going off the script, but do you like to give any final reflections from your side, Gabrielle and Mark and Mats?
I just want to, thank everybody, and thank you to Johan and to the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. You kind of got us started on all this actually, and all the work that you and the team have been doing in supporting us and really driving this whole initiative. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to add my thanks to everybody. I think this is always the most difficult bit, is to come up with an idea and starting to scale it, but it's fantastic to see the companies that you've been able to recruit for you in terms of the, I see it here on the screen now.
Okay.
So I want to thank you and basically express our commitment to keep the torch burning and take it forward.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And Mats?
Yeah, we will continue to work with the help of our customers, but also pull our suppliers in the chain and really secure that we can create a change in the whole tech sector from that perspective. And then with you doing it on the food sector, we are getting there, right?
That's great, and I can promise we will aim to double this number by next year at least, okay? But we have to do it together. So I'd like to also say a thank. Telia couldn't be here. They have done a fantastic work, as you said, Gabrielle, and Business Sweden. And I'd like to thank my incredible team, Alva who's here, Mats and Danielle, who has done this incredible job behind us. So just some final words. So I hope you all enjoyed our session. So please check out the guide, use it, contribute. It is the starting point. You think about that. And the idea is really to accelerate best practice on how we can halve emissions by 2030 in all value chains and share that openly with everyone. So we're also encouraging all companies to ask their suppliers to at least halve emissions by 2030. And I'm saying all companies. We can only succeed if we collaborate, and let's scale supply chain action exponentially. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.